I direct my concern for being fundamental and telling the truth. We don't know the ultimate truth about God, about destiny, about the future of this planet. We know what happens in front of us.
In the morning.
You're listening to The Seed, Conversations for Radical Hope, a Pendle Hill podcast where Quakers and other seekers come together to explore visions of the world growing through the cracks of our broken systems. I'm your host, Dwight Dunston. This season's theme is inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? In it, he wrote, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." My guest today is Sarah Ruden, an award-winning translator and writer whose work brings the ancient world to life with honesty, clarity, and care. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. And so as you're arriving here, an invitation to take some deep breaths, to grab an extra sip of water, to, as best you can, ready yourself with a relaxed position, with some centering silence and worship. I'm so excited for our guest, Sarah, to join us in just a bit. But as you know, this season, we ground each episode in a short reading. And today's reading is a summary of the story of Hagar and Ishmael found in Genesis chapter 6-21. Hagar is an enslaved Egyptian woman in the household of Sarai and Abram, later Sarah and Abraham. Sarai cannot have children, so she says to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agrees. Hagar becomes pregnant. Instead of honor, she meets jealousy and hostility. Sarai blames Abram, and he replies, "Your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best." Sarai mistreats Hagar so harshly that she runs away. Pregnant, desperate, and alone, she's in the wilderness. At a spring, an angel of the Lord appears and calls her by name. "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" The angel tells her to return, but also gives her a promise. "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Hagar responds by giving God a name, El Roi, the God who sees me. She says, "I have now seen the one who sees me." She returns and gives birth to Ishmael. For more than a decade, they remain in Abraham's household. But when Sarah miraculously gives birth to Isaac, conflict flares again. At a celebration, Sarah demands, "Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Abraham, distressed, sends Hagar and Ishmael into the desert with bread and a skin of water. When the water is gone, Hagar places her teenage son under a bush and steps away. She says, "I cannot watch the boy die." She weeps, but God hears Ishmael's cries. "Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there." God opens Hagar's eyes. She sees a well. They live. Ishmael grows up in the wilderness, becomes an archer, and Hagar finds him a wife from Egypt. This is some of the story of Hagar and Ishmael. Joining us on the show today is Sarah Ruden. She is one of the leading translators of the ancient classics. Her work spans Greek and Roman literature, as well as sacred texts. Sarah is known for setting a new standard of accuracy and style, while also making these works accessible to today's readers. Beyond translation, she writes about culture and human rights, always with a concern for power and truth, shaped by her Quaker faith. She has received major awards. She had Whitting and Silvers grants. Sarah, welcome to The Seed.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
I am curious, how are you arriving to our conversation?
I am stuck indoors mainly because I have proofreading for a forthcoming book, which is called Reproductive Wrongs, A Short History of Bad Ideas About Women. As I work on that, I, of course, think about the political crisis that we're going through. I look into the garden and I see how, in a minute and homely way, our political crisis has to do with things that are close to us, things that we care about a lot.
We talk a lot about the world that is growing up through the cracks of our broken systems. And I'm curious why this book, Reproductive Wrongs, feels like the book to write and release.
I spent quite a bit of time earlier in my life in countries that were recovering from authoritarianism. Spent 2 years in Germany, right around the time of reunification. Then I spent around 10 years in South Africa, right after apartheid. I actually voted in the first multiracial elections in South Africa in 1994. I was, of course, very happy that both nations had emerged from authoritarianism, but I could see that it was a disease that embedded itself very deeply in the body politic, so that many generations would be paying for the excesses of past regimes. I'm very worried that the United States is sliding into the same situation. We're not just going to pass through this present crisis. We're going to be trying very hard to put ourselves back together again over 50 years, 100 years, and we won't have the world's goodwill to help us in this. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot of grief and a lot of pain about our situation, and I'm writing Reproductive Wrongs, finishing it now, in fact, because I didn't know another way to contribute in a basic way, in a more powerful way to the moment that we're in. I'm a translator of Latin and Greek and a bit of Hebrew. So what do I contribute? That was my big dilemma. I thought, well, I know a lot about authoritarianism because I've lived in its aftermath. And I'm also an expert in texts. My business in life is words. And over the past number of years, I have been working with a lot of concern on the problem of language and truth. And you confront that problem as a translator. And you see in translations of the Bible and the standard English text how truth has been distorted because of ideological concerns, because of what Western authorities want out of the Bible in the modern world. They want it, for example, to support imperialism. They want it to support materialism. They want it to support war, and they want it to support authoritarian ideologies. So they sometimes quite shamelessly just change the word and don't record what the Bible actually says. So all of this work got me thinking about authoritarianism in a very sensitive area of human endeavor, and that's reproduction. And we, of course, have a crisis in reproductive rights here in the United States. So I decided to look at texts dating from around 17 BC. We don't have a precise date, but clear up to the present, concerning the rights of women and couples and families to make their own decisions about having children or not having children. And I just had fascinating texts to work with. For example, the earliest anti-choice propaganda, and this is anti-abortion literature in this case, dates from right around 17 BC. And it's a pair of poems by the poet Ovid. And these are mind-blowing because they hit on major points that are made by propaganda of the anti-abortion movement here in the United States. The same ideas are there. And one idea is that women must not be allowed reproductive choice because they will not choose to bear the Holy Child. Pagans said this. Ovid was a pagan. Christians say this still today. It's the same idea. It's so wildly bizarre idea, but women are expected to form their lives around it. And this area of propaganda makes women particularly vulnerable because their intimate reproductive lives are not such as they can just stand up and answer back, because we're talking about very private matters. We're talking about very vulnerable and sensitive matters. So women are not going to be slugging it out in the public arena and risk, for example, their relationships with their partners, their relationships with their children, with their parents, with all these people who are concerned with their reproductive rights, with their reproductive lives. So women are, well, in the past, they've been nearly compelled to be silent. So you could say anything about them you wanted. Any weird story you could make up, yeah, you could just say it, and they have to be silent. And the silence of women in the Hebrew Bible, I think, is very interesting, very provocative to think about. Women speak up, not often and at quite late points in the story. In the story we're concerned about here, Hagar has actually very little to say. The people who are in power, Sarai and Abram, they get to speak. They are the ones, early in the story who are, conversing with God about the fate of this poor woman and the fate of this poor woman and her child. The people in power pretty much own the God who is supposed to be presiding over the situation. And it's just kind of pitiful, the voicelessness of women, where they are most concerned.
As you know, this season we're exploring themes of love and power, and I'm curious how you see these forces interacting when it comes to reproductive rights, women dignity in your work and in the world.
Well, it's a very difficult question, and to start to address it, a couple days ago, I contacted my Hebrew teacher, my beloved Hebrew teacher who taught me at Yale Divinity School. She's got 5 daughters herself. She's certainly an authority on motherhood, as well as an authority on the Hebrew Bible, with a special concern for the women depicted in the Hebrew Bible. I asked her, well, what about love and justice in the story here? She addressed the justice part, and she said, what does it have to do with justice? You want justice. You go to Exodus and all those commandments about dealing fairly and stuff. And she's quite right, because at this stage of the Hebrew Bible's narrative, the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, are just coming into existence. And their father is Abraham. And his means of becoming a father is his reproductive life, particularly his fatherhood of this miraculous baby, Isaac, who is going to be, from whom, all the uncountable descendants will come. And this is not really at this stage a story about rules and laws, except for, one law, the law of circumcision. Very, very important. You have the big compendium of laws that come later, after the delivery of the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. So in that sense, you have a concern for justice, and you have the legal structure shown arising, which will be deeply identified with the Jewish people. But at this later stage, you really have a fairly, I think, straightforward depiction of the way things are. This is just the way things are. We have slaves. We treat them however we want. Slavery is just the norm here. We don't even have rules around it. Powerful men will have multiple sex partners. They will have a lot of children. Only certain children will have rights. The men will determine who has rights and who doesn't. We should maybe take a step back in this discussion and not talk about love and power, because we just have these clans who are wandering around doing their thing, trying to survive in this wilderness. They're seasonal migratory people. Let's actually take a step back, forget about justice, because that seems to have to do with the legal system. Forget about love, which is barely mentioned in these stories. I'm going to get back to that a little later. And just talk about responsibility, which is a matter of truth, or if you like, fact. And that's who is doing what to whom and why. And my concern always, as somebody who studies text, is once this question is raised, who's faking you out,
Hmm.
who's lying, who's manipulating the story, and why. That's what I've always been really deeply concerned with. In this story, the manipulations are hard to count. There are so many of them. And you'll notice that responsibility is shoved off onto Sarai, the matriarch, mother of the Hebrew race. We don't actually know precisely how these clans are structured, but they are pretty plainly patriarchal. She doesn't have a say in anything. It's not true that this bondswoman belongs to her. No, he belongs to Abraham. He bought her. He controls her. And he controls how others under his power treat her. So all of this palaver, sanctioned by God, allegedly, that this is Sarai's responsibility and Sarai's fault if anything bad happens, and that God will kind of make it all right in someday with his great providence as the generations roll on. We will see how this all had meaning. But no, it's you strip down all of that fancy rhetoric from your text, and you have the story, which was probably very typical at the time. You buy a slave woman, you treat her any way you like, you impregnate her. If she causes conflict in your camp, she's gone. To, again, avoid responsibility, you don't just kill her. You dump her out in the desert, give her a little bit to eat and drink so that you feel better about what's happened. You have washed your hands of the situation. And you can tell yourself that you tried, and she dies, and her helpless child with her. This is what actually happens. So you have this whole ornamentation of providence, of decency, of morality, and it's just obviously glazed on the top of this story because people, especially men, don't want to take responsibility for what actually happens. Yeah, in that way, it's a removal of responsibility for the main human actors here, the human actors with the most power. And I found that exact same kind of thing throughout the propaganda that attacked women's reproductive choice, both positive and negative, attacked their right to have children if they wanted them, attacked their right not to have children if they didn't want them. And one really electrifying, disgusting instance of it comes from a witch hunting guide that was published in the late 15th century. And this guide inspired the stepped up witch hunting that happened, in the early modern period, this free for all of torture and murder against women. And it was directed against not women in general, but against fertile women and their midwives. So we're talking about young women, married women, women with families, and the women who took care of them medically. For trying a witch, which included instructions for stripping away all her rights. She didn't even have the ordinary rights of this period for having representation, for example, being able to mount a defense. There were some basic legal rights established at this time. She didn't get any of them. Basically she didn't get any because you were supposed to convict every last suspect you arrested. And it was only, I think, influential women who could bring the secular authorities to bear against the church authorities who were persecuting them by pulling strings in local power networks. Only those women got off. Once you had hounded, tortured, imprisoned, maimed woman and forced her to confess to fairy tales of witchcraft, you turned her over to the secular authorities to burn, but you turned her over to them with a verbal formula, and it's set out here. You beg the secular authorities not to harm this poor woman physically. That is, you meant burn her. If they didn't burn her, there would be hell to pay. They had to burn her. But you said to excuse yourself and to whitewash what you were doing. You said, you were required to say, don't harm her physically. And that just, that blew my mind. You come out of this research really angry. And, I wrote this book with a certain Black humor style. I didn't really know how to approach such disturbing material, but it is everywhere.
Yeah.
Those in power do not, it's not just with women, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Women, well, that was the subject I was looking at, the oppression of women, but you could find it with the oppression of anybody. Those in power do not take any responsibility. And that's a matter of the truth.
Mm. And bringing it to our present, I'm thinking sacred texts that undoubtedly shape our present day, right? The kinds of laws
Mhm.
that we see, the ways patriarchy continues across time, and shows up, in not only here in American society, but the ways that its influences are found in lots of different cultures and places. But certainly thinking about here in the US, the ways these texts have been used to justify um the treatment, the power over certain bodies in this country. I mean, you've certainly done your research and work around birthing bodies in this country, but we know that the ways oppression is able to continue to function depends on people using stories about certain bodies being, it's justified to treat certain bodies this way, and it's justified that people make decisions about other people's bodies or well-beings or livelihoods. And I'm coming back to this idea of power and love, and you are a Quaker, Sarah. I'm imagining that part of your identity informs and inspires the way that you write, the way that you tackle these topics, these issues. I'm curious, as a Quaker, if you could share a little bit about how your faith and spirituality has shaped your understanding of love, of power, and of justice. Would love to hear that, especially for our listeners there who are Quaker, but seekers of other, are on the path in their own spiritual ways. How has your Quaker faith influenced you?
Well, to be quite honest, my Quaker faith leaves me confused. I don't know how to deal with the more complex questions. I don't know, in particular, and most painfully, how we get out of this horrible place that we're in as a nation. I don't know how we do this. My mind goes around and around and as to how we will get out of it with the least pain, with the least damage. And I don't have answers there. But I do have a sense that you start with telling the truth.
Hmm.
You just start with telling the truth. And that has actually led to a looser relationship of mine with institutional Quakerism.
Mm-hmm.
Am not nearly as active as I used to be. And part of that is because my local meeting was laid down. We didn't have enough people to support it. But the other thing is that I am not as trusting as I used to be toward Quakers, just to tell the truth. And you see behind me a flag of Ukraine. I had a major falling out with my yearly meeting because of a declaration they made about the war in Ukraine, which absolutely appalled me.
Hmm.
It called, for example, for humanitarian help for both sides in this conflict. That is, the United States was to send material aid to Russia and assist them in their invasion of Ukraine and
Hmm.
their attempt to conquer Ukraine. And I was furious because that is a total denial of the truth.
Hmm.
Russia is the invader. Russia is the bad guy. You don't, and I don't think Quakers ever have before, support the aggressor in violence. You don't. And Quakers, we are ourselves led, we believe we are led by the Holy Spirit to utterly deny violence, but that means we don't participate in it ourselves.
Hmm.
Or we are not active in violence. We do not kill. We do not wound. We do not strike. Yeah, that's our calling, and we pay the price for that. If we are faithful Quakers. But to say to someone else you're not entitled to defend yourself it's a lie. It's a refusal to recognize the truth of human evil, that people who are powerful visit violence on the defenseless, and they may not want to take our advice that you lie down and die and let an invader, say, walk over you,
Hmm.
take your children away, burn your homes, subject you to a political slavery. So, yeah, I direct my concern for just being fundamental and telling the truth, just starting at step one, and telling the empirical truth about a situation, which human beings can do. We don't know, what the ultimate truth is about God, about destiny, about, the future of this planet. We know what happens in front of us. We know whom we can trust to tell the truth about, say, a political situation or a military situation.
I appreciate the vulnerability and the honesty, the truth telling you're doing by just saying outright, I don't know. I'm confused. I have a non-complete relationship, non-settled relationship right now with Quakerism, and for this reason. And I think what you're bringing to light, and I imagine that some of the folks listening here who are part of Quaker communities might have similar feelings around potentially different issues, but perhaps a similar issue that you're lifting up. And it's something that I think about in myself, of the places where the Quaker faith feels like it's taking a stand for peace, or the places where it feels like it's being complicit in what Martin Luther King called an obnoxious peace. King wrote a beautiful article after Autherine Lucy was kicked out of the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, the first Black woman to be accepted. She went to school. It was only a couple days. There were riots, and the local newspaper said, finally, peace has returned to the University of Alabama after she was expelled. And King wrote this beautiful article in 1957 called When Peace Becomes Obnoxious, basically saying if peace is going along with the status quo, I don't want it. If peace means being treated as a second-class citizen, I don't want it. I don't want that kind of peace that you're trying to serve up to me. And so what I hear you saying, Sarah, and back to your point about truth and responsibility as it related to these biblical texts, but even in today, there's something fundamental about what you're lifting up. I just want to be able to tell the truth. I want there to be responsibility taken for what I see, what's happening, and for it not to be distorted in any way, to not be served up some obnoxious definition or reality of peace or of truth, but to really be able to tell the truth.
I love that example that you cite. I love that testimony of Martin Luther King. He's essentially saying, don't choose your sacrificial goat and just turn your back on that person or on those people. You can't do that. I saw that happen in South Africa while I was living there in the form of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which got much better press over here than it deserved. But it was, as a whole, an enterprise in manufactured forgiveness and sweeping victimization under the rug. It was a machine to put a functional legal system aside and tell tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims of apartheid, gonna forgive and go without compensation or any meaningful compensation because it's convenient for us. So we're going to orchestrate forgiveness. We're going to put on a drama of forgiveness for the world. And, you had a lot of victims who were not heard saying what they said, which is that this is nonsense. This is a re-victimization. We're not part of your drama. We have lives. We lost loved ones. We lost land. We lost livelihood. We lost everything to this tyranny. And, just because you're elite is now collaborating with former elite, we're supposed to give up, any hope of justice. And I think here we can use that word. That was justice they wanted.
We're moving towards a close. There's so many themes and questions and ponderings this conversation has opened up for me. So I'm so grateful. I'm excited to now be in this in relationship and in conversation with you, and hope to continue to be moving forward from this time. But just as a way to close, I'm thinking about a listener out there, someone who's hearing this conversation and thinking about, I want to be more committed to living into and speaking truth. I want to be more committed to living a life that feels grounded in integrity. I want to be someone who does not shun responsibility, but moves towards it, or calls other people to be in right relationship with responsibility. But I don't know the first step. What's, from your perspective, a simple first step that someone can take to be in right relationship with truth, with responsibility, with justice?
At this point, we've mainly been talking about religion and ethics and scripture, things in that realm. I can point to science. Somebody that I admired in South Africa a great deal was George Ellis, who was a physicist, and he was an activist. He opposed apartheid forthrightly and at considerable cost to himself, and I think was helpful in that as someone who had, spent his life pursuing a hard science, he trusted empirical fact. He trusted our ability to know things.
Hmm.
And if you look, say, at climate change, yeah, you see science is very persuasive. Not always, absolutely right. Not always, absolutely dominant in our conversations, but it is very persuasive. Empirical fact is something that exists. So if we look, for example, at medical science, if we look at climate science, we can get a start on how to think about a better life, a decent life, about how we would express love and justice, how we would reform our broken system, because there are things that we can know. We ought to trust what we can know.
Well, I want to thank you, Sarah, for modeling for us ways that we can trust what we know. Your research and your commitment to truth and your scholarship and the way that you are living your life is a model for connecting to and being grounded by truth, by knowledge, not shunning. I just feel so much of the ways that you've committed to really facing the truth, whether it's hard to do or easy to do. Some of the things you lifted up in our conversation today from your scholarship, I imagine aren't the easiest, simplest, nicest things to digest and then write about. But it feels very Quakerly of you, if I can just reflect it back, to look out into the world, to trust the information that you have gathered empirically, experientially, and to speak on that clearly, concisely. And for me, when I do that, that takes courage. It takes courage. It takes bravery. It takes a sense of and level of hopefulness. And you embody all those things in a way that is so tangible and so clear. And I'm grateful for all of the work that you've done, are doing, and will continue to do, Sarah. So thank you. And thank you for being
Thank
in
you.
conversation.
I want to thank you in turn for this conversation. You have a great gift in evoking brave language, or braver language than people are used to using, I think, because I don't know whether I've been this frank in any interview ever before. And this is because of your openness and your loving conduct of this conversation. Just really, really appreciate it. You have a gift.
Thank you, friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is just completely brilliant. The topic, the setup, the open forum, you know, and your patience in invoking, frank and interesting and provocative things. I certainly couldn't have done this without you, and I don't think I've ever done it before. This is kind of a revelation for me. I'm really grateful.
Wow.
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah. Thanks awfully.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you to our listeners for joining us in that conversation with Sarah Ruden. Sarah's brilliance in scholarship and vulnerability was riveting and truthfully challenging at points for me. This idea that when we know something, we need to speak the truth of it, and the way she wove together these ideas of truth and responsibility was very clear. And also, I know in my own life is not always easy to do, especially if saying the truth could mean being ostracized or criticized, hurt or harmed, or if it just will feel like no one's listening, we're speaking into the void. MLK was someone in my mind who spoke truth clearly and committedly, and did so at a great cost. And I believe that as we usher in the world that's growing up through the cracks of our broken systems, many of us will be called to speak truth to power, whether it's around reproductive rights, economic justice, racial justice, speaking out against wars, genocides, speaking truth in our neighborhoods, our families, maybe even our Quaker meetings. The responsibility to speak truth is something that I believe will continue to lay on the hearts and minds of many of us, and how we find the courage and the commitment to do that will be important. I just come back to so many of the conversations we've been having on this season about embodying power and love in community, through community, finding the resilience and the commitment through our loved ones, through people throughout history. And so as you turn away from this episode, maybe you're thinking about the last reflection or those last words from Sarah about how we take a small step to committing to truth and love and justice. I really heard her saying, when you have to speak it into the world. When you know something, when you see an injustice, you have to speak to it. And it's going to sound different from how Sarah does it. It's going to sound different from how King did it in his lifetime. But I know and I trust that in community, you'll find out how best to speak that truth committedly, clearly, concisely. And if you want to learn more about Sarah and her work, we talked about one of her books that is coming out, Reproductive Wrongs. That'll be in the new year, but she actually has a book right now coming out, published by Yale University Press, entitled Perpetua, The Woman, the Martyr. And you can learn more about Sarah and all of her books at sarahruden.com. That's Sarah, RUDEN.com. So please make sure to check out her work, her research, and more about her on her website. The Seed is a project of Pendle Hill, a Quaker center open to all for spirit-led learning, retreat, and community. We're located in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, on the traditional territory of the Lenape people. Many of our guests are teachers, leaders, and speakers at Pendle Hill. We host retreats, workshops, and lectures all year round. For a full list of our upcoming education opportunities, visit pendlehill.org/learn. This episode was produced and edited by Peterson Toscano. Our theme music is the I Rise Project by Reverend Retta Morgan and Bennett Kuhn, produced by Astronautical Records. Other music comes from epidemicsound.com. You also heard some of my music. You can stay in touch by following us at Pendle Hills on all social media platforms, or by emailing podcast@pendlehill.org. That's podcast@pendlehill. For full episode transcript, links, and show notes, visit pendlehill.org/podcast. You can also worship with me online through Pendle Hill once a month. I attend this virtual Quaker meeting on the last Friday of the month. The worship begins at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time and lasts about 40 minutes. To access the virtual worship space via Zoom, visit pendlehill.org/worship. If you're finding these conversations meaningful, consider supporting our work financially. Simply head over to pendlehill.org/donate. You can also support us by letting people in your life know about our podcast. We want to connect with other folks like you, so please subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast platform. These seeds could not be planted without you.